don't accuse the clouds of making aesthetic mistakes. So really is a certain light in which you can see human beings, both good and bad, as perfect forms of nature. You may have fashionable discriminations about who is beautiful and who is ugly. You may have metaphysical discriminations about who is sick and who is healthy. You may have moral discriminations about who is good and who is evil. But these are all points of view, relative points of view. They are all legitimate because they are parts of the functioning of the whole. The fact that you take those points of view, that too is part of nature. But a skillful person lives on two levels at once. You live basically on the level where you know there are no mistakes. Can't be. Everything moves in accordance with what the Chinese call the Tao, the way of nature. And if you have that basic feeling, you will always be sane. But you are able to comprehend within that feeling a more restricted point of view, whereby things are good and bad. Just as in the confines of this room and this area, it's perfectly clear that there's a difference between the up direction and the down direction. But we know that this area is situated in interstellar space, and there is no up and no down. Now the second situation doesn't contradict the first. But if you have only the discriminatory point of view, if you take your fundamental stand as a being on the difference between good and evil, you get in the Christian hang-up. You have then to say that there is eternal heaven and eternal hell, that the distinction between good and evil is radical. And if you do that, you begin to suffer from a disease called chronic guilt, which is one of the most destructive emotions that anybody can have. You feel an outcast from the universe, at odds with reality itself, at odds with God. And that sends people quite mad and is responsible for a good deal of the craziness of Western civilization. It's making too much of a good thing out of the distinction between good and evil. It is an important distinction, but it's not fundamentally important. And you have to learn to admit different degrees of importance. And just say that because you can't just say that because a certain distinction isn't absolute, that it's not important. After all, your own physical formation is not absolute, but it's important. So, the situation of man in this network is to repeat the proposition, on the one hand, that he as a psychophysical organism is something that the whole cosmos is doing. That was as much of truth, I think, as there is in modern astrology, which I regard as a pseudoscience. It is based on a very fundamental principle. When you draw a map of a person's soul, you draw a small picture of the universe. And that is the design of that person's individuality.